Morning, and thank you for joining us today for the Los Angeles Public Library's fourth program in the Maternal and Family Mental Health series, The Role of Dads and Partners. Becoming a father is transformative. Fathers undergo hormonal and psychological changes that support them to nurture and bond with their babies. Fathers who form connections with their babies promote child and maternal health. However, these same changes make them more likely to experience postpartum depression. TJ Hill will share his experience with his depression after the adoption of his daughter. Marino Aragon will share his experience as a father, supporting fathers to build connections with their children. And Dr. Kevin Gruenberg will moderate the discussion and provide tools and resources to mitigate paternal postpartum depression and support family resilience. Dr. Gruenberg is a clinical psychologist. Oops, I just lost my... 1 second, please. Okay, I'm back. So Dr. Gruenberg is a clinical psychologist and the director of Love Dad, a nonprofit organization promoting work with fathers as an expected and integrated part of perinatal and early childhood support programs. He has co-developed and researched a home visitation program for fathers and their young children meant to promote paternal engagement and family well-being. He also provides consultation and training on fatherhood, paternal perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and building parent-child relationships. He serves on the Maternal Mental Health Governing Council. He also provides psychotherapy to children, families, and parents in private practice. Lastly, he is the father to 2 daughters. Marino Aragon is a parent educator and bilingual Spanish-English certified teacher in nonviolent education and parenting. For the past 10 years, he has facilitated groups for fathers at Project Fatherhood at the Children's Institute and is a longtime father advocate. Marino is also a parent educator for Home Visiting with Dads, a project of Love Dad. He has carried his trauma-informed work into an innovative program that provides support for fathers in the school setting, partnering with schools that are part of LAUSD. Marino is also engaged in similar programs at the Echo Center for Nonviolent Parenting and Education and Children's Bureau. He has served in the steering committee for Trauma-Informed Care Task Force of Los Angeles. He is the father to 2 children. TJ Hill is the executive director of the Disability Community Resource Center in Western Los Angeles. He has over 20 years of experience in public interest law and public policy. TJ and his husband Jay adopted their daughter Chloe from birth in 2013. They all live in Santa Monica, California. So a few housekeeping notes for listeners. You can, of course, ask questions throughout the presentations, and some questions we will be able to answer in chat, and others we'll answer at the end. And so now let's get started. Thanks.
My PowerPoint up. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you, LA Public Library and Maternal Mental Health Now for having us speak about the role of dads and partners in new families. This is a really important topic that's often not talked about. And I mean, we should start probably with something that's quite obvious, but often overlooked, particularly in the services for new families. And that is that about 50% of parents are fathers. And yet, even though about 50% of parents are fathers, we often don't think about them as having important roles in the lives of young children. So today, TJ and Marino and I were going to talk about some of the ways in which dads are important to young children, and also some of the ways in which they're susceptible to parenting challenges. This is some evidence that we all are dads. I always like to include something at least about our families. And so before we start, I'm curious, although I'm unfortunately not going to be able to see the comments because of the way this platform is right now, but I think everyone else will be able to see them. I'm curious who's here. Do we have expectant parents? Do we have parents? Do we have people considering being parents? Any fathers? Any mothers? Do you have anyone that has any idea how to get your kids to stop fighting during your 1 week off? for the first time in a while. If you have any tips for me, I'm desperate. We had a great Thanksgiving week, and I hope you all did too. But gosh, kids together can just fight so much. So I hope you can add that to the chat while I'm sort of moving on. Okay. So I'd like to start with a story. This is a pre-pandemic story when we used to be able to go out for brunch, and and actually, like we had Thanksgiving. Everyone had pretty limited Thanksgivings this year. This was a time when we could all be together out at lunch in the middle of the day. And so my family is having a brunch with a good friend of mine and his wife and his baby, who's 6 months old. His baby's named Ira. And so Ira's about 6 months, and he was diagnosed with a very rare genetic disorder that's quite kind of devastating news for the family, as Ira is going to have developmental challenges his whole life. And I could see that my friend was pretty depressed, and his wife also, and it's been really tough news. And so one of the things about this disorder is that Ira is quite underreactive to those around him. It takes a lot to get him stimulated and connected. And so we have this brunch where it's as if there's almost no baby present, which says a lot, because 6 months olds are remarkable at commanding attention, at engaging the adults around them, and adults just kind of gravitate towards 6 month olds. And so my friend's wife goes to the bathroom, and my friend looks over at Ira, and for the first time in 45 minutes picks up Ira and starts, I'm not sure if you can see me well enough, but he starts bicep curling little baby Ira. And all of a sudden, both of their affects change. So my friend all of a sudden looks enlivened and bright. Ira, who's quiet, starts cooing and making sounds, his eyes open, and is excited kind of for the first time in this meal. And I love this story because so much is actually at play in a moment like this for dads and parents, really. And this, I would say, this preparation that dads have to nurture starts very early on. So dads who are living in close proximity to pregnant women start undergoing hormonal changes that really prepare them to nurture. And for men who aren't in relationship with women and might not have an expectancy like that, like one in a heterosexual couple, these changes start to happen being in relationship to a baby, being around a baby. And so some of these changes are remarkable, right? So there's a decrease in testosterone. There's a decrease in estradiol, and these decreases improve a father's ability to be understanding of the baby, to attend to baby's cries, to just be generally responsive to the baby. There's a reduction in aggression, which generally makes for better caretaking. And these testosterone levels actually remain lower in dads kind of for the rest of their life. So when you look at dads who have kids and dads who don't have kids, their testosterone, the dads who have kids tend to have lower levels of testosterone. So there's also neurochemical changes that are happening that promote parents working together. And this has all to do with oxytocin. Oxytocin is this really incredible hormone that is the love and connection hormone. Could spend the whole hour talking just about oxytocin, but we'll just talk about it for a minute or so. And oxytocin levels tend to synchronize in pregnant partners living together. And the idea is that when you're living together and your oxytocin levels synchronize, that there's this sort of biological support for parenting together. Now, parenting together does not mean that you do the same thing. So, in fact, having two parents doing the exact same thing would be biologically disadvantageous. Um, so parents are meant to work together but not do the same thing. And oxytocin has a lot to do with that. So oxytocin tends to be released in moms during affectionate contact. So what I mean by that is, like, when we think of kind of face-to-face contact that moms and babies tend to have, when we think of feeding or breastfeeding, when we think of matrescence or that change in vocal in a mother's voice when talking to the baby, all of these things tend to release oxytocin. But for dads, it's actually, the pathways are different. So fathers have oxytocin released during more stimulatory contact. So when we hear about rough and tumble contact or rough and tumble play, this is actually when oxytocin is released for dads, or one of the ways in which oxytocin is released. So, for example, when I see my friend bouncing his baby up and down, like doing these sort of bicep curls, he's having oxytocin released also. And this oxytocin is amazing, as I mentioned before, because oxytocin tends to be mirrored in dyads. So when it's released for the dad, it's also being released for the baby. And you see this moment between Ira and his dad becoming sort of expansive in love and connection. One of the things about, we often hear about dads is that dads are too rough with kids, or they're too excitable. And that's something that makes a lot more sense when we understand that this sort of excitability, this physical contact, tends to be the moments when fathers feel connected and have biological support for feeling connected. In fact, I was at a conference in Montana a few weeks ago. It was to a group in Montana, excuse me. And I'm presenting about this sort of similar topic a little bit more in depth. And one of the co-presenters' daughter was in the room because they were doing virtual school also. And the daughter comes over and funny enough, interrupts our presentation, or interrupts when I'm talking about this, and has this dialogue between her and her mom. And she goes, "Mom, this is what I'm talking about. I love it when Dad," she was a little older, she was 8, but "I love it when Dad does this with me." And the mom's like, "Well, it always makes me so nervous." And you could see her face, she's beaming in talking about this kind of rough play that she has with her dad. This also has to do, these interactive styles are also different. So dads tend to be much less predictable in interactions with babies, whereas moms tend to be much more predictable. And when you think about the difference between having someone that tends to be more predictable and more unpredictable, predictability has to do with safety, security, and unpredictability has to do with excitement, has to do with play. So while I'm speaking in big generalizations here, when we think about parents not doing the same thing but working together in the interest of their child, that can really offer a whole package and promote all aspects of development. Dads also tend to carry babies outwards, looking out at the world, whereas moms tend to carry babies towards the chest. So these are some of the ways in which moms and dads tend to do things differently. And in same-sex couples, I think what ends up happening is that you have one parent favoring one set of sort of these principles and another parent more favoring the other. Okay. So I'm talking a little bit about the sort of neurobiological support that promotes connection and bonding and fatherhood. But in this sort of developing connections with babies and young children, dads are able to support development across all domains. So dads are promoting attachment. It's this critical ability to feel connected, to feel trust in other people, to experience love. And all of this supports one's ability, it supports a child's ability to be resilient. Dads are really excellent at promoting autonomy and independence. That's the ability to be curious about the world and confident in exploring their environment, to feel competent, to feel skilled. And in sort of popular psychology, we're hearing this a lot about a growth mindset, to have a growth mindset. Dads are also promoting regulation. This tends to be sort of an overused clinical term, but it's really the ability to manage your thoughts and feelings, the ability to manage your behavior, the ability to have focused attention, things like that. And lastly, they're promoting social skills and social competence. Here I have a picture actually of my father is the child in the back, and his father is the adult in this picture, and my uncle is the one in the front. And something that we hear a lot about in doing fatherhood work is that I didn't have a dad who was available for me, or my dad was scary, my dad was abusive, my dad was, we often hear about a lot of things that are not good about fathers. And my grandfather actually was one of these fathers. So my dad had a father who was aggressive, who was abusive, who abused alcohol, who created a very unstable family. And what happened for my, and I'm not really, it's sometimes hard to understand how my dad was able to create his own sort of path. But my dad was able to create a home environment that was far different from his own, and really changed the course of the sort of parenting from one generation. And of course, his sort of presence and his ability to be connected with my brother and I really has shaped also who I am as a father. And so that's something that I really think is important to know, is that things can change in one generation. That it can change with you. And sometimes you need more support with that, and sometimes you're able to do it on your own. So as we're talking about the need for support and how, talking about the need for support, dads are also susceptible to mental health challenges, like new moms. And I know this series has talked a lot about maternal mental health challenges or postpartum depression. I'm going to use the word perinatal several times sort of in the next few minutes. So perinatal means this time from expectancy through the first year. So 10% of dads experience perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. That could be like a postnatal depression. So 10% of dads. So basically, dads who have experienced the perinatal mental health challenge. And there's been research internationally about this. I think there was some concern that this would only be amongst maybe white dads who would talk about this. And actually that's not true. That there were community samples across the US looking at all different racial demographics. There were international studies in Iran, in Jamaica, in Sweden, also looking at, and about 10% of dads are depressed. And when moms are depressed, 25 to 50% of dads are also. That is a huge number. And I think what it shows is that the mental health of a family is so integrated. So for when one person is struggling, it makes everyone susceptible. And that's really why we need to be providing support for everyone in families when someone is depressed. And also when dads are depressed, moms' rates of depression also are much greater. So what does it look like when men struggle? And I think this is where actually it gets really confusing, because oftentimes I think the way men struggle look like men are being jerks, or men are being assholes, excuse my language. you know, and these expressions of distress really are can be best understood, I think, by understanding how kind of the social pressure boys and men have to conform to kind of hypermasculine norms, and how hypermasculinity limits men's ability to have a wider range of feelings and to be more in touch with their feelings and more expressive in healthy ways of their feelings. So what you see is that men have tend to have extreme irritability, but extreme irritability can also be, men can be aggressive, but that's a sign of distress. Social isolation or withdrawal, and that could be anything from not being interested in parenting to playing too many video games to looking at too much porn. Increased alcohol or substance use, that this is a more clear manifestation of struggling, but something that men tend to go to during times of distress. And lastly, men tend to complain about more having physical challenges during this time rather than mental health challenges, but often they can result from kind of mental health challenges. This is a bit of a schematic, at least, or a visual around how perinatal mood and anxiety disorders really affect families. So how paternal depression increases the risk of intimate partner violence or child abuse. It makes dads less engaging. So you know that, like, that all the sort of positivity I was talking about in the beginning of about all the things dads can promote. Dads tend to just be less engaged. They tend to be less involved in that sort of rough and tumble play. They increase the risk of childhood psychopathology. And a lot of this, similar things can be said about maternal depression in the perinatal period. That also increases risk as well. Okay, so I'd like to transition now to a conversation with TJ and Marino. I think that the two people I really want you all to hear more from. But I want to start off with TJ. You know, TJ, I've heard you talk about your experience with depression as a new dad. You're unique in that you're so able to articulate what that experience was like. And I'd like to start with you, and maybe you could share a little bit about your story.
Sure. Hi, thanks. For me, we, as a same-sex couple, had to be very conscious about wanting to start a family. So it was the adoption process took a very long time. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it, and just in terms of like my life trajectory, parenting was one of the things that I wanted most in my life. You know, I wanted to be a dad so much, and so when our daughter was born, it was internally so painful and confusing at the same time that I wasn't having all of the feelings that I thought I was supposed to be having. And then I also stepped into the primary caretaker role when we brought her home from the hospital. And I think that was also really challenging for me. We didn't have a lot of parental supports around us, you know, in terms of other friends with children. And so being in that, you know, 24/7 care mode initially also kind of put me for a whirl. The sort of the most complex issue for me was articulating that something wasn't right to people. And when I say people, you know, to our pediatrician, to my primary care doctor, just, you know, saying like, I don't feel right, something's not right here. and being essentially dismissed. And that also was really distressing, you know, that, oh, you're just a new parent, everybody experiences this, it's just a lack of sleep, and you know, these are normal feelings, and they weren't normal feelings. And so for me, it took a long time, because I can articulate very well sort of, you know, what that experience was for me. I was able to eventually navigate to a point where I was able to get the help and support that I needed. And things changed like almost overnight once I had that acknowledgement that, okay, like this is something different, and that you are having depression. And I think that that the issues around mental health and parenting as a male is just there's still so much barriers in our delivery system and our support system in society, that it almost it amplifies the stigma that I think that a lot of men have about accessing mental health in general, or that, you know, or being engaged as a parent. And so, you know, for me, it was having to work through those things in a really difficult way, in a time where I thought, oh my gosh, this is supposed to be the happiest point of my life. And you know, I've worked through that, but that initial journey was really hard. And it was, once I started talking about it and really reaching out, I realized how many other men didn't have these same experiences that I was having. And I think that was also very useful for me.
Could you elaborate a bit more about what were some of the things that you realized that made you feel like you were struggling, or made you feel like, okay, I'm not myself right now?
Yeah, so I think one of the first feelings that I had that was like a red flag that something wasn't right was, again, I was in the primary care role. So, you know, I'm handling all the feedings, I'm there all day, I'm the person at night getting up. And I think one of the first feelings that I had that I knew that was a red flag was that feeling of resentment towards my new baby. And I mean, and it was deep resentment. It was like, you know, I can't even take a shower. I can't go and do the things I want to do. And what, you know, and instead of sort of feeling really joy out of having that quality time with my daughter, I think that resentment was sort of the first red flag for me. There were other things that sort of started building on that. And then I think that resentment also, you know, I started manifesting the same feelings for my partner, who, again, had gone into this journey, you know, in this real loving way, right? And then it was all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a second, like, you're not even engaged, like, in feeling a lot of resentment towards him for not sort of having the same experiences that I was having, which was also really odd. And so there was a, you know, and then everything else, like the sleep disturbances, you know, my sleep patterns weren't normal in the sense that I was having, I would have like manic bursts of energy, and times where I felt like I could handle everything and everything was good. And then it would be like a real deep, you know, canyon sort of with sleep. And so there were lots of things that were sort of interacting that that made me think like, wait a second, something's not right. And then I think the other part was just the, you know, the typical things associated with depression, you know, that this intense sadness, which I really couldn't place of like where that was happening, because again, I was surrounded by all these things that should have been bringing me so much joy.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you talk about the sort of resentment and the sort of disconnect and the conflict you felt with your husband. I mean, these are some of the things in a way that I was sort of talking about when, you know, that men tend to feel kind of during this time. And it's I mean, it's sad to hear about how you did seek out this support. you know, and how you really had to push to advocate for yourself to say, hey, there's something going on. But we do have a system that doesn't tend to recognize or even know that these are the signs of distress for new fathers. And I appreciate the sort of bravery of just sharing your story. I mean, I know it's not easy. You know, Marino, you've done so much of this work. Marino and I work together, and I hear about his work with dads, and I also we both work with families and dads. But I'm always like, I listen to Marino and like hear about like what he does with dads, and I'm always like sort of look up to him, you know. And I'm curious, you know, you have heard about ways in which dads struggle in so many different ways, and I think one of the things that we know is that most people are not able to, most men are not able to articulate their story like TJ. You know? And so, what do you do when a father is not able to articulate their story in this way? They might not realize they're in distress, or their partner realizes something's going on, but they don't know themselves. What do you do?
Hi, to stay here. It's just one of the things that I learned working with fathers. First of all, I'm a father, so I had to go through all those emotions and feelings, and have no idea how to articulate. And before I had my first child, we used to go to groups to get some support, and most of the time the support was for my wife. It was just, okay, you have to support your wife, and you have to be prepared for that. And they would, oh, okay, yes, I will. I'm sure I will, but I didn't know how to do it. So when I work with fathers, most of the fathers they came to sessions or groups. Just, I'm here because I did something violent, or I'm frustrated all the time. I'm not sleeping well. I'm stressed out, and they don't know. They don't have that connection. They can't make that connection. They don't even know. The only thing they know that they're having some behaviors that are not healthy, and not even using those words, but and so I have to just I have to listen to them. I have to be present with them, and I have to just meet them where are they, with by knowing that they, whatever is happening now with the newborn, with the situation they're at, the relationship with the children and the mother of the children or the partner, they have something even heavier most of the time, many of the time, and the fathers I work with, they bring with from their childhood. So I had to model them how to be present, how to listen, and how to create that bonding. And I'm doing it with them. Just listening to them, being present, not judging them, not trying to fix them. Just, how you doing? What happened? Tell me about how was the relationship with your parents? And then when they start to see, oh, somebody is listening to me, somebody's paying attention to me, that's the whole change start to happen right there. They just, oh, okay, I'm not a problem. I'm not a violent person. I'm not a person that you have to fix because I'm not doing the best thing for my children. No, you're just a human being, and nobody listened to you support, and they start to share things many times. They didn't even talk before to anybody. Just the first time, just talking about their feelings, their needs. That you're supposed to know everything, and we don't. We can't. We are not prepared for that. But that's the role that the society said, okay, you're a man, you should know better. We don't. And we don't have to know. And we need support and help too. And so I remember having sessions with fathers. And they bring their children and they start to, I ask questions, show me how you play with your child. And they do so many stuff, and that I don't even do that with my children. And I say, wow, so you are doing it. So while you're taking these sessions or these classes, you know what you're doing, and you're doing very well. So it's just to support them, just in making them more. So just to talk to them about the meaning of doing what they're doing, because sometimes they don't even know why they are doing it. They are doing it. They love to do it. They play. But they don't know the meaning behind the playing, the talking, the conversation. So I just help them to be more intentional. So every time you sit with your child and you put names on objects and feelings and colors, you are giving them more vocabulary in order to express themselves. When you follow their lead and you play with them, no matter what they're playing, but you go to their universe and you play in the way they play, even it doesn't make sense for you, but it makes sense for them. You're promoting autonomy, and they're more adventurous. They're more confident. So that type of information I share with them. But most of the time, they know how to connect with it. They have that capability, not only just to support the mother or the partner, but to being that 50% of the family, of the parent, the children need. And they have that. We have that. And so when you start to see the father as a very important part of the life of the children, and huge important part of the family, and the approach is different. So the impact and the response from the fathers is completely different too. It's just make sure that you are you're in the same team with them, and there is something to fix. Yeah, we're gonna fix that, but that's not the goal. The goal is show them how to connect, how to be present, how to have a good communication, because then they're gonna go to their family and they're gonna do the same. They're gonna be present, they're gonna listen, and they're gonna communicate differently.
I love how
you're not telling them. Sorry.
Oh no! What I was saying, I just love how you're talking about how when you can listen to a dad, be curious about what a dad is feeling, to be curious about their story, that enables the dad to also be more present with his kids. That enables a dad to be more present with his family, to have a place to talk about. And I think what you're saying.
Sorry, I lost you for 1 second.
No, it's okay. Well, what I was saying is that what you're saying is that your presence with the dad, you're being able to listen to a dad, hear their story, really enables them also to be more available to their family, to their children. You know, I think you said something about entering the child's universe, you know, following their lead. But it starts with, I mean, as professionals, I feel like it's our imperative to, you know, follow a client's lead or a dad's lead. But I think even as people in our communities, to be able to listen to people's experiences, to fathers' experiences, and get to know what's going on for them, it's just so important. I would like to shift the conversation a little bit, because you both are touching on something about culture, you know, and about, and we know, I mean, in sort of, in all ways, really embedded in kind of a multitude of cultures. But I'm curious if you can talk, both of you, talk about some of the ways in which you feel like culture shapes fatherhood, you know, and how you view it, how you view it with your you know, your clients. Either way, it's for both of you. This one's for both of you.
All right. So yeah, for me, I mean, I think that becoming a father, I became really aware of sort of the lack of cultural support for fatherhood, and it was interesting for me as you know, as a gay man, also sort of entering this world where traditionally we're not perceived as being a part of as well. So there was definitely cultural barriers in that. I mean, I had huge, you know, not huge, but I had a good number of friends, you know, from in the gay community who were not really supportive of you know, becoming parents and what that meant, and you know, and so there was a lot of sort of changes in my own sort of immediate cultural sphere, I think, and it also made me really aware of sort of as being a same-sex parent, and particularly, you know, two men, that the resources out in the world, and almost and it's like everything, from, you know, product design for, you know, baby bottles and diaper bags. Like, I remember, you know, spending months trying to find a diaper bag that didn't look like, you know, a purse, you know, and I was like, I don't want, can I get something, you know? And I remember when I found like a camouflage baby bag, I was so excited. I was like, oh wow, that's great, you know, it's like a cargo bag, you know. But so I really think from those small sort of like just embedded cultural things about, you know, baby things, that they are inherently like female and designed to be female, to just like the support in the community. You know, every group, you know, in our neighborhood or something was like the moms group at the playground, and the moms this and the moms that, and it was like, okay, well, where are the dads? Like, what do the dads do? Like, and you know, and for me, that actually sort of you know, made me want to be that leader. So, you know, I started reaching out to other dads and trying to do things like, hey, let's get together, like, let's take the kids to the beach, let's do this, you know, which, you know, I think also really improved my sense of parenting, and also sort of built a you know, a fraternity of other dads, which was really nice for me.
What about you,
yeah, one of the things we talking all with the fathers I work with, and because I have to make a huge change in my the way I connect with my family, because my family, my dad was the provider and the one that enforced the discipline, and that was all about it. No playing with me, no going out, no have time with me. He was alcoholic plus, so he wasn't even present with the rest of the family. So I didn't have that. So I had to change that. I had to change the something that was my father never cooked, my father never cleaned. He never did that type of. I didn't do it until I moved to live by myself because my mom and my sister used to do that. So I had to change everything in my head, and I had to also just break some of the roles that I have with my friends because when they see me doing that kind of stuff, it's like what you're doing. We don't do that. Just come here. We're gonna talk about cars and girls and movies and I don't know cell phones, but you shouldn't be cleaning. So, but they didn't say it in that way, but it was part of the okay. Come here, just stop doing what you're doing, and like I had to change that for me, and then and I had to yeah. So most of the time when I talk with fathers in groups, most of the time they're are Latino fathers, Spanish speakers. We talk about needs and feelings. That's most of the time. And we are listening most of the time, which is very hard for some fathers too, because they're very talkative and that's the way they they relate in the family, just talking and have the voice that says everything, even though we don't know, but we say it anyways. And then they spend time in a group of fathers with other fathers, just listening and being present and active listening. So a lot of skills that in my culture we don't have. We don't listen. We make decisions without knowing more many times and without listening to others. And if it's not in my way, it, it won't be in any way. Uh, so there are many things that I'm yeah I had to deal with it, and then I'm still doing it and because it's part of my background and it's very strong, and so I can't just I have to be focused all the time, or otherwise I go in different to the different path that it wasn't healthy for me, so it's not healthy for my family.
Yeah, I hear both of you talk about how you both were able to individually overcome something, certain pressures to sort of be a certain way, maybe as a man, or and I think there are a lot of men that don't feel like they can even imagine themselves in roles of being a nurturing dad, a caring father, to be involved in these sort of playful ways, and it just really makes me think about, I mean, this is quite a complex sort of issue about sort of promoting this, but just how important it is to give dads and men experiences to exercise other parts of themselves. And that it's so gratifying to feel connected to your child. You know, it's so, I mean, and it actually, I mean, going back to sort of neurobiology, when you feel connected to your child, you actually want to spend more time with them, and it's self-reinforcing. And that's something that, I mean, I think as a sort of society, we could do a much better job at sort of promoting. And of course, that would sort of have an impact on sort of gender equity and kind of things like that. The more involved dads are, kind of the better it is, I think, for everyone. We have about 10 minutes left, and I imagine there are some questions or comments that I know Madeline was gonna read some or had some questions for us. And I just want to make sure we leave time for that. And I so appreciate both of you guys, and even getting to have our few meetings in preparation for this, and to hear you guys talk today about your experiences. I feel like I always learn from the two of you, so thank you. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Oh, is Madeline coming back? I'm looking at comments. I'm not sure. Oh yeah. Okay. Okay, there we go. Hi.
Hello, thank you so much. So informative and much needed. I wanted to know, I was looking to see if there are any comments that were coming up that were more questions in the chats. And I didn't see question, more a lot of support, like this is really needed and it's really helpful to hear how postpartum depression typically manifests in men. You know, that was something that was specifically commented on. And I guess from our perspective and some of the work we do here in the library, and I mentioned this to you earlier, is there is some stigma and some barriers around men seeking mental health assistance. You know, therapy, like, you know, that it just seems like, why would I need that? And that's just some feedback that we've had through our work in this space. And I was wondering if you could speak to, you know, what kinds of strategies do you use to help bridge, you know, bridge that for people who are reluctant, specifically men who might feel reluctant. We may have some women watching who are wanting to talk to their partners, some men watching who want to talk to their partners who may be more reluctant. Do you have any advice?
Do you guys mind if I start off and then? I mean, I go back to what Marina was saying, actually. You know, just how important it is to show curiosity and interest about the mental lives of dads. You know, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? How are you doing? I mean, these very simple kind of acts around being curious about your well-being, I think is really the first step. Because I think what we find in doing work in my colleagues who do work with men, like in Marino, I'm sure you can vouch for this, and TJ probably from your experience you could, is that it's not that men don't have much to say about their experience, but there needs to be avenues to talk about them, that feel actually safe to talk about them. You know, there's a you know, so when TJ's talking about, you know, hey, there, like everywhere I look, it's like everything about being a parent is geared towards moms. That's not really a safe situation for a new dad to then put themselves out there and talk about the resentment that you feel towards your child. You know, like, can you imagine going into a room where you're maybe the only father and then talking about that and how much stigma you would feel? You know, so I think it's also about having avenues where men and fathers can talk to other fathers about it. There's a great organization called Project Fatherhood here in Los Angeles that runs groups. Marino can talk about this, but that I would sort of recommend for dads who are in need to talk. I don't know, Marino, TJ, do you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two parts to sort of what you said, Kevin, and I think that is that you know, we need to ask these questions of dads, and then the other part of that is we also need to really listen, because my experience is that once you get, and this is probably from both of your perspectives in terms of being on the professional side, is once you bridge that gap and sort of like get men to start talking about, you know, fatherhood and being parents, like they have a lot to say. They have you know, my experience is kind of like finding those avenues. So, you know, here in Los Angeles, we're in a really metro area. You would think there would be a lot of support kind of groups that I could, you know, still is difficult. So, you know, I went and looked at Facebook groups, you know, just dad groups, and you know, it's awesome to see sort of the conversations that are happening in those groups, because they're sort of like, peer-to-peer support groups, which are amazing. And while they're not clinically focused, they can provide people a lot of that sort of interconnectedness in the male fatherhood experience. So yeah, that would be my advice on that.
Yeah, combating loneliness is really an important part of this, and I think that's what you're sort of saying.
Yeah.
I just want to add that the same questions and approach and services and support that agencies offer for mothers, they should be available for the father at the same time. The same question, the same everything that you care about the mother, everything that the agency care about the mother, is the same need is for the father. The same question, the same how you doing, how you feel, what you need, where are you now? Everything is not just. Sometimes I have fathers. The social worker came today, but she didn't talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
She talked to my wife, to the children, and I was just there. I asked a question to her, what you're doing here. If you don't talk to me, you come to my house, you don't talk to me. And so it's a lot of stuff that should be done in the same way that the mother and the children have, the support they have. The city of Long Beach, they have a program supporting agencies in order to be father friendly and how to promote father nurture. And for sure, Children's Institute is the agency that for the father who has the program that gives support for father in a group setting. And I'm part of that program for the last 10 years. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you. I think we're just about rounding up out of time. And so I just want to make sure that we share with our listeners that we'll be updating our maternal and family mental health webpage to include a lot of the resources that have been mentioned in many of the chats over the series of events that we've done. So you can look at the comments here for some information, but we'll be updating our page. And I wanted to encourage everyone to come next week, same time on Monday at 11 a.m. And that will be our final session in the series for maternal and family mental health. And this one is on paid leave. So it's an important topic now, and a lot of women have questions about their rights to paid leave, especially during the pandemic. So please join in if you are interested in this. And thank you so much today, gentlemen. This was really informative, and clearly there was a lot of interest. We had a lot of comments. Let me just check the comments very quickly before we go to see if there's anything else that's come up. Nope. No, I don't have any other questions, just lots of accolades. So much needed, apparently, and we really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll revisit this topic in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much, guys.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.